For Real News is sponsored by assholes like you, so pay up, motherfucker. Good evening. I want to welcome you guys back to the For Real News. I'm Ramon again, bold like a leopard. This is episode 8, and we're going to go on a slightly different topic. Back to the Real News. The last episode was about the David Pakman show, who I kind of developed a huge appreciation for the way he twists things, but with the Real News, I think you'll see a pattern, whether they're talking about affairs in the UK or Brazil or Venezuela or Israel or Iran or Russia. They have a strange way of twisting things. It's not always wrong. I think that their coverage of Russia is fairly accurate. I think some of their coverage of the school system in Baltimore, important stuff, and their coverage of the decline of the progressive press in Baltimore, with the city paper. I did a huge episode on that. They do reveal a lot of things. They may not always look at the nuances the way that I do, but they do a good job of at least raising issues that might be of interest for people that aren't necessarily progressive, and for that I think we should thank them. But in this episode, we're going to focus on a different issue of the state-citizen relationship that the Real News raises. Often, one of the main issues that is used to promote the progressive agenda in the United States is the need for universal health care and as it's called some other places, single payer or government-run health care, whatever you want to call it. But beyond that debate, what about other services that have been provided traditionally by the state? Now, it used to be that in many countries, especially I think in the United States, the telephones and other utilities, they were owned by the government or by a monopoly. But what is a good example of something that's still run by the state that has been a topic of contention? Many of you would kind of stagger to think about public housing as really a state-run problem. But it is. And successive generations of politicians, typically in urban areas, they want to talk about public housing as if it's a need for the poor and disenfranchised people of the inner cities. And I think that the Real News, what they end up doing, as you'll see when I dissect their coverage of the Baltimore housing crisis and their housing authority and all the scandals there, you see really that unintentionally they end up proving the point that I would make, which is that in order for people to truly live free and healthy and autonomous lives, you can't have people managing their property and basically observing them and moderating what they do. And that's what public housing does. And I know this not because I'm judging these people, the people that take to public housing. I think it's a very serious issue to have to live in public housing where, for example, you might have a lot of dependents and you're not able to buy your own home or rent your own apartment. So I'm certainly not judging the people that are in public housing, just like I don't judge people that are in Medicaid. People need medical care. It doesn't matter what level of income they have. Are there people that don't deserve it? Sure. In terms of being on this system based on the criteria right now, there are people that should not be on Medicaid that are on Medicaid. And I think that they have to be weaned off of it by giving them more options and giving them the incentive to seek other healthcare options. I myself have recently gotten a new health plan. I've been on government assistance on healthcare before. I think many people do go. I mean, it should not be looked at as a shame to have used a government service in the past because it was a normalized thing. So to a large degree, the Republican Party and the conservative movement, they've done a huge disservice to the cause of a free and and open society by castigating people that have used these benefits. But what should they do? Instead of attacking the people that have used these services, conservatives and people that are just for free markets, you don't have to call them conservatives, you could call them free market capitalists, but let's call them conservatives for argument's sake. What they really need to do, and this is not something that's easy, is to show that these services end up handcuffing people. They end up giving them more constraints. You have more requirements. There's more regulation, inevitably, with a government service than there would be with a service that is open to consumer feedback. Government services are generally not open to consumer feedback. They're not as flexible. You have a massive bureaucracy and a monolith managing it. That's why I just kind of wonder sometimes if people that are in favor of socialist policies, in favor of state-managed sectors of the economy, if they're really aware of what they're talking about. And this comes from a personal place too. Now, the people for real news probably wouldn't be happy getting criticism from somebody of my background, but here goes. I have two parents. One of them passed away. My mother was they're both from Israel. The Real News has a reporter from Israel, also not very proud of where he's come from. I happen to think there's nothing wrong with being an Israeli, but that's not the point here. They do. But that's not the point here. What we're talking about is a socialized economy where certain sectors of the production are in the hands of the state. Now, in Israel, for a long time, the construction industry was largely managed by a large construction conglomerate. My grandpa worked on it. He was my paternal grandpa, for a long time as a construction foreman. And then on the other hand, in terms of the actual housing, there were these things called kibbutzes, which were communal farms usually. Basically, they were communal farms where everybody owned an equal share of the property. In fact, it was not ownership. Everybody owned the entire place. All the members of the kibbutz would own part of it. In Russia, they have the same thing. It's called the kolkhoz. I think that in Russia, they've been largely abolished. In Israel, they're not so prevalent anymore for reasons that I'm going to get to. So public housing is basically what was the standard in these communities. And not everybody in the country lived on this public housing, but a fair amount of the successful people, the people that were at the head of the pioneer movement, as it was called there, the chalutzim, over there, they were members of the kibbutz movement. They were socialist. Some of them were more socialist than they were Jewish, or more socialist than they were Zionist. Two different things. Let's not get bogged down into that. However, at a certain point after the country came to be founded, the kibbutz movement hit a snag. One of the issues was that people started to realize that by sharing in everything, sharing in all of the comforts of the kibbutz, in reality, people didn't enjoy them. There were certain things that people wanted to bring in, such as electronics, that the kibbutz wouldn't let them, because otherwise it would mean that the kibbutz would have to buy one for everyone. People couldn't own their own car. People couldn't, they couldn't manage their own bank account and stay a member of the kibbutz. It was a very draconian society. I remember meeting people that had been members of these communities, that they said that when they were kids, the kibbutz would basically not waste any sort of food. So once they made the food, you were required to eat it until it was all gone. And apparently it was a traumatic experience. There were other experiences where kids were told to shower together, boys and girls. And for many of them, that was, especially for the parents, many parents who were new to the kibbutz, that was a shock experience. So enough about the kibbutz. My mom grew up on one, And she remembers saying that she passed away a few years ago, but I remember her saying to me that it was an experience that was unsatisfying. You were basically part of a herd mentality. There was no choice over there. You were assigned things to do, and you would do them. So when people talk about public housing, for me, I don't think that the kibbutz is necessarily the model that you base it on, but there are things that make public housing trend towards a coercive society. Because whether or not there are duties, there are many rules. If you violate the rules, then the authority that runs the public housing can determine if you're penalized. I had an uncle who, and also the conditions in the housing have to be determined by the authority that are there. I had an uncle also in Israel. He was a great uncle, once removed. I remember he lived on a property that was formerly public housing. It was built and given to immigrants from Morocco. I'm not Moroccan, but that part of the family is. We're related by marriage. And they were given to a lot of these Moroccan immigrants. And to be honest with you, the maintenance of those properties deteriorated over time. Eventually, it was given to the people. The housing authority sort of devolved some of those duties to the actual occupants. But inevitably, these properties were not of the same quality as a privately owned property. Now, is that the fault of the people living there? I don't think so. But ultimately, you will see in this video, a lot of the themes that I'm talking about in terms of coercion, you're going to have rules that you have to abide by when you're in this house. It's as if the authority that owns these public houses, they are your parents. They're your mommy and daddy. Those are the issues that I believe are going to show through. It doesn't matter where you are in terms of public housing. We talk a lot about why healthcare, being a publicly owned enterprise, would be a problem. Those of you that are on my side, a lot of people don't think about housing the same way. Would you like to live your entire life as if you're still in a college or high school dorm? I think most people would agree that that's not that's not an experience that feels free and liberating. So I want you to join me. We'll tackle the real news coverage of the housing crisis in Baltimore. I'm going to make a few observations. Again, I don't think that we really should blame the people that are in the houses, in these properties, for the problems that are there. I mean, obviously, some of them are to blame for crimes that are committed or whatever, but there are plenty of innocent people living there that have no reason to earn our contempt. I think that, if anything, they're being held hostage by a system that's inflexible and is difficult to reform.